couple of the folks, but not the whole group. So if we might, if everybody could just at least give me your, your name, title, organization, key role, that would be awesome, or your key interest in today's session.
Cool. I'll call you guys out. Doug, why don't you kick it off?
I'm Doug Hill. I'm the founder and director of the Maker Institute at the Keenan Center.
Great.
Moyne College in Syracuse.
I'm wearing the coolest shirt on the call at the moment. It's a test. Anyone know what that shirt means?
No.
I
That's
can't
not
see
geeky
the
enough, I
bottom
guess.
circle. What does the bottom circle say?
The bottom circle is everything. Life, the universe, and
Okay.
everything. The answer is 42. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, guys. Come on.
Oh, man.
You gotta step it up here, guys. Disappointing.
Well, you're way above. I didn't even reheat my lunch, Doug. You got to give me. David, how about you?
Yeah. I'm David. I'm a student at Lemoyne, and I'm the community manager intern for More Good Jobs.
All right, Mike.
I'm the director of the Keenan Center at Lemoyne, which is the entrepreneurship center, innovation and creativity at Lemoyne, and was at Syracuse for 17 years prior and helped build an entrepreneurial program there as well.
Yeah, which program? Your name is so familiar.
Yeah, so I was the sandbox and all of that. That all started back in 2007 or 8, I think. I don't know when the official start was. So yeah, we started that out of the iSchool up at SU, and then became more campus wide, and now it's the Blackstone Launchpad. And as you know, it's up and going there, and under good leadership. And now I'm at Lemoyne, so I moved over here specifically because one of the elements of the thing we were doing at SU was the local, having a local impact, and Lemoyne was that much more locally focused. So that was part of the experiment. Could we be smaller, more concentrated, higher quality, and with a higher population of local students in terms of outcome impact on the local community?
Excellent. Love the pathway, and congrats. You get to look back to SU and see good things happening. So.
Yeah, we just had their first unicorn out of that crowd density. They were student. I still tell the story, but I still remember them sitting in class, not really knowing what they were going to do. And by the end of the semester, having $150,000 in contracts and sort of moving on.
Love that proud parent feeling.
Yeah, right.
Mike is also a Start Fast Venture Accelerator graduate. So he has been on an entrepreneurial path and has some sidekicks that are going on as well. So he's, in addition to being an Olympic level coach for rowing, man of many talents.
Outstanding. Thanks for joining.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm here because I love your model. By the way, I'm a huge fan.
Well, thank you.
I've also invested in Promptus, who I know has benefited from what you're doing, not to mention just knowing a bunch of other companies that have benefited from your efforts. So big fan.
Great. Well, thanks for saying so.
Yeah.
Wow, we got 2 Zach Marshalls. That is impressive.
Hopefully I can hear you guys on the new one.
Zach, why don't you take it away?
Sure. So I'm Zach Marshall. I just moved back to Rochester, New York last year from San Francisco. And I'm a few months into my first founder experience. I started a company called Conterra, and we're building a private security labor marketplace, which is really turning into a lot more than a marketplace and more like a series of service brokerages as we start to pull the different pieces on both sides of the private security market.
Nice. Working with Start Fast or anyone else?
Ironically, I applied with LaunchNY and got what I thought was a really good call with the EIR, but I don't have his email, and I've been LinkedInning him, and I don't know what's next there. But right. I'll solve that.
I was going to say I can take some action on that one.
Thank you. Yeah, I raised a few $100K from angels and friends and people that I knew through the startup community in San Francisco. And so far, I haven't really connected in Rochester. Well, no, I've connected with a ton of people in Rochester, but the only investor I have local is a small check. And I guess I don't know if it's private or not, but I've got one investor local.
Great.
Hassan,
Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Marnie. My name is Hassan Stevens. I am actually currently serving as an entrepreneur in residence for the Keenan Center with these lovely gentlemen. And I also am the founder and executive director for the Good Life Philanthropic Youth Foundation, which is a nonprofit that engages the highest risk youth population in Onondaga County. Also a little bit throughout the state of New York. We are really focusing on taking that population and merging the values of hip hop culture with entrepreneurship for what we call hip hoppreneurship, and really helping these youth segue out of poverty, incarceration, and a number of other social issues and hurdles that they face. Outside of that, on a personal level, I'm also a serial entrepreneur, and recently have just launched a clothing brand that I'm focused on right now.
Excellent. Well, we'll need to be in touch. I've got some, we'll need to be in touch. We'll put it that way.
that's why we do it. Hassan's doing some amazing work. I just can't oversell like what he's doing there. It's just amazing stuff for our community, I have to say. So obviously, you know me, Marnie, and you know Martin. Martin, I don't know if you want to say anything further.
No, I think I've had some exposure to everybody on here except Zach, and look forward to developing that a little bit more and helping Zach as well. But I'm a huge Marnie fan, and would point out that more than just LaunchNY, what I appreciate most about Marnie is her extending the reach across not only geographic boundaries, but institutional boundaries. And anyone that's been through the More Good Jobs story knows how near and dear that is to my heart. But also having that lens, as she does, as an entrepreneur herself, not just in the nonprofit that she's doing with LaunchNY, but in starting companies before this LaunchNY, while also being an academic. So she's got a lot of hats, and comes at things from a variety of different perspectives, all of which seem to culminate now to help push along the growth of LaunchNY. So thanks, Marnie, for coming and joining us here at More Good Jobs.
Well, thanks so much, Martin. And the feeling's mutual. Martin and I have shared the vision that it's together that we're going to make this successful and make this community a place, in this community, I mean, upstate New York, a place where we can all look to entrepreneurs to be leading our economy, leading our community. And, that hasn't always been the history in more recent decades. So I think we're starting to see some headway. So briefly, maybe to take off on what Martin mentioned, and I apologize, I'm getting over laryngitis, so I'm just about past that. But my background, so I did the academic route. So when you think about some of the deep tech companies, or not necessarily even deep tech, but companies coming out of academia, that was really my entrepreneurial introduction. Although I always like to say that my first entrepreneurial introduction was being a salesperson in a women's clothing store, because I learned many, many lessons through that experience in my college, high school and college years. But I went into a startup that was taking the behavioral science work that I was doing at University of Rochester as a clinical psychology grad student. So I was earning my doctorate, having a family, all that good stuff. And my advisor got me into a startup that was essentially taking the work we were doing in the lab and turn that into products working with private industry. So that is really how I got into a startup. So we essentially were doing behavioral management programs for things like stopping smoking, things like managing your health, whether that be asthma, COPD, or other kinds of medical conditions. So that whole realm of behavioral medicine was really my jam, and I was very committed to it. All my master's and doctoral work was in that arena. And one of the first products we were creating was a behavioral program to go with the nicotine patch. So yes, pharma very and much involved with us, as well as managed care. So that was all, believe it or not, happening in the 90s when the IT railroads were not so well built. The tracks weren't really making it easy for us to onboard patients, but we were using telephone outreach and demand publishing and interactive voice recognition actually to interact as I would as a behavioral counselor. So we essentially took what we hoped that doctors and nurses would do, but frankly, we're never going to have the time or inclination to do in helping patients deal with more than just getting a prescription, and automated that. So we grew a company in Rochester, went public. We were listed on NASDAQ. So this was in the 90s. And, essentially I rode that experience with a lot of other business people who, had the expertise that I did not. Mine was the content area. So from there, I went to a .com in the health IT space, which still exists today. It's called medscape.com. And I created a consumer health website called CVS Health Watch at the time. So we were competing with the likes of Dr. Coop and WebMD, and it got pretty wild. So as you might imagine, I wasn't doing that in Western New York. I was sitting in my home that I've lived in for 30 years. But I was a road warrior at the time and working in New York City. So, what I want to note is that I was an academic who decided to chase creating impact from the work I was doing in the lab. And that is a lot of what we're trying to do in upstate New York today. So certainly we have a lot of entrepreneurs who are not connected to academia, but we have many who are as well. So it was an incredible experience. And I went public again when I went to Medscape. And then, but those were crazy days. And trying to get to back up to upstate New York and realizing that our region could have these kind of quote cool jobs too. So that's the road I've been on since I came back to town. Pretty much was back in the region, around 2000. So from there, I started working in economic development. And, we were all realizing that upstate New York was obviously bleeding jobs. Eastman Kodak, the bankruptcy actually occurred even after that, but it had lost so many jobs in the Rochester area, and on I could go. So, I was very fortunate to get together with colleagues who understood that our region had a lot of assets that we could commercialize, whether they came from academia or not. We have phenomenal people who were feeling compelled to leave the area if they had a great entrepreneurial idea, because they simply could not find the combination of the risk capital and the talent. And to be honest, that's really what drove LaunchNY. But what happened for me is I ended up moving ultimately from kind of an economic development, small nonprofit, into the University at Buffalo, and I was able to actually have a lot more resources to bring to bear, and started, creating venture forums, for example, because we saw that everybody we were trying to help in these science areas or tech areas or advanced manufacturing, they were suffering the same issue: lack of entrepreneurial talent and expertise, and the risk capital. And so, a lot of that activity got going, even in like 2009, 2010. And so for me, I was able to really meet a lot of people nationally and see models of how other communities were doing this kind of work. And the great thing that happened to us was actually in 2009, we held a summit, and we had a venture development organization out of Cleveland, Ohio, come and speak. And they essentially presented what I'll explain to you, and some of you already know, is the model of LaunchNY as a venture development organization. And, I remember looking at my colleagues, and we all said, gee, that's Cleveland. They put together a program that brought entrepreneurial talent and support together with risk capital. Like, we can do that. We're upstate New York. There's no reason we can't do this. And that actually drove a group of us, including some economic developers, myself coming somewhat out of academia at the time, but also one of our angel investors, to say, let's put this together. So that was the journey that became LaunchNY today. So let me just share a couple of slides, just because I want to just give you the framework. Sorry, let me see if I can get myself to the share screen here. Sorry. Here we go. Okay. So I've mentioned the phrase venture development organization, and it is a somewhat newer phenomenon, but there are actually some well-established venture development organizations, particularly in neighboring states like Ohio and Pennsylvania, that started 2 and 3 decades ago. So those states got on entrepreneurship in some ways, way ahead of New York State. New York State's had a few programs like the Center for Advanced Technologies through NYSTAR, which certainly I learned a lot and built a lot on that. But I still think New York has not actually figured out this venture development organization model. So despite our name, some of you would be surprised to know we are not a New York State entity. We are a private nonprofit. And while we had hoped that Launch New York would have been backed by New York State the way Pennsylvania and Ohio and other states have backed their venture development organizations to the tune of literally hundreds of millions of dollars, that's not the road we were traveling. So in some respects, having to be more of a bootstrapped organization actually, I think has benefited us in terms of being able to get more of the private sector involved. Because at the end of the day, I think we all appreciate why Silicon Valley is what it is, why Cambridge, Mass is what it is, why New York City is what it is. It's not government, it's and the public piece that's really driving it's the private piece. So for us, this is the area that we cover. And Launch New York, the good news, I don't have to be sitting here telling you that unless the company's creating a gazillion jobs, I can't help you. In fact, job and wealth creation is our mission, and specifically working with high growth potential businesses. Now, James, Martin, and many of you know there are a lot of organizations helping businesses, small business, and maybe startups, but the legacy programs out there from a Small Business Administration particularly have been built heavily around helping more of a Main Street businesses that are doing most of their revenue coming from the region. So the traded revenue concept is really what's driving jobs and wealth across this country. And that's what we focus on. So if a company comes to us, so Zach, like when you came to us, we are looking for you to have 10 million in top line revenue forecasts in 5 to 7 years. Most of our companies, like yourself, when you come to us, you have little or no revenue. So we are totally betting on the jockey and the story you're telling us at that time. We don't charge for our services, but we really are here to help probably way more companies than we would ever expect to succeed, because we know we have to have a wide top of the funnel in order for that unicorn-like destiny to actually happen. And so our services really are all about the pro bono mentoring that you referenced, and that's combined with seed capital access. So we were basing the model on Jumpstart in Cleveland, Innovation Works in Pittsburgh, toward a mission like the following. In Pittsburgh, Innovation Works found that after a good period of time of becoming established, that 95% of the venture capital investments in their community were into companies that had come through Innovation Works. They had created this training ground, if you will, and that is really how I, as one of the co-founders of Launch New York, have driven it forward. So just quick numbers and then kind of get you to the financing programs, which probably are kind of the most unique piece. One thing some of you may not realize, because a lot of you are younger than I am in this field, mentorship back in even 2000, 2005, the public side didn't want to hear about it. They felt that mentorship was a bunch of privileged people helping a bunch of privileged people. And so there was really not a feeling, other than a small business development center, that we ought to be supporting individuals who want to come as experts to help entrepreneurs. The good news is that changed. And in fact, mentorship is being proven out to be one of the most important factors in the success of a startup. So that's one of our 2 key pillars, is the mentorship. So since 2012, it's been over 1,300 companies. And those companies, we do have a unicorn in the mixer with an ACV auctions. So of course, they lend serious amount of money to that one, over $1 billion that's been raised. Theirs is about 800 million of that, in fact. So obviously, we'd love to have more of those in the mix. And then the revenues, you're seeing substantial revenues. 160 million, and over 4,500 jobs supported. You know, a lot of small ones in there, certainly a lot of failures. But the other key piece that we brought to bear, and I wasn't the original CEO of LaunchNY. We had a private sector person come in initially. And it was very interesting to have someone from the private sector try to figure out how to run a grant supported organization. So that ultimately, you know, was a struggle. And so I came in and moved and left the university at Buffalo and actually housed LaunchNY at that time. And I became CEO in 2014. So I was somewhat rabid about the fact that we had to have the venture capital. We needed that fund, and that fund had never happened. New York State was not going to put the money up, and nor did they. So essentially, believe it or not, I actually did a crowdfunding campaign to get things moving. In 2015, a crowdfunding campaign for helping startups in upstate New York. So we learned a lot from it, but I ultimately was able to get that off the ground. And in 2016, we made our first investments, and we, within a year and a half or 2 years, became the most active seed fund in New York State. So we still do invest in 2 to 4 companies every month. You know, and some months they're a little quieter, but right now I have 6 deals in process that hopefully will close by the end of this month. So it's really active, and it's small but mighty dollars. I haven't had huge dollars to be putting even 6 figures in, typically initially. Now we're sort of at that level. But what I can tell you that I don't even show here is we have seen about a 20x leverage factor of other dollars coming into our companies, either in immediate co-investment or follow-on. So the fact is, if you're willing to take the lead, you're willing to put yourself out there and work at the training level, you will have a lot of other funders who want to rally around you. And that's kind of the theme of the rest of what I'll talk about here. A couple of things I want to mention. So the portfolio today, as we sit, we have 76 companies in our nonprofit seed fund. I'll talk more in a minute about the fact that we started a limited partner fund, because a lot of people said, we love what you're doing, but we don't want to just donate. We'd love to reap returns to the extent that your companies succeed. So our limited partner fund started 2 years ago. I'm a limited partner in the fund, so is Martin, along with over 70 other limited partners. So it's a big group. We just had our annual meeting last week, actually. And we have 49 companies that we've invested in 2 years. So it's almost like a mutual fund dedicated to upstate New York. So loving that, and actually think that that's kind of one of the unique pieces here. I'm just going to mention quickly these other 3 logos at the bottom here. So when I realized New York State was not going to fund us, and here I am, a CEO of this organization, it was really my first time where the lights were being kept on was totally dependent on me. And I remember thinking, geez, where are we going with this thing? You know, living off of grants that are maybe 100K here or there, like how can you survive? I do pay my mentors, and we have 36 of them. That's grown obviously over time. But I am committed to using the paid model combined with volunteers. So I need dollars for that. I need dollars for staff, and we obviously need investment capital. So the really great thing I found out from my national experience working with people like Steve Case and Rise of the Rest was that the U.S. Treasury Department actually has a program that funds organizations like ours that provide financing in low-income areas, or census tracts, as they call them. This has turned out to be a huge boon for us. There are over 1,100 of these, what they call CDFIs nationally. 1,100 of them practically are debt financing. So we are one of only 15 venture funding CDFIs in the country. And the one thing I'm just going to tell you that kind of blew me away is we already had served probably, 900 companies by the time I applied for this. We naturally qualified without my trying, meaning we naturally had more than 70% of our companies located in low-income census tracts in this footprint you see here. That's how economically distressed upstate New York still is. And while I have to pay a bit more attention now when I'm doing the investments, because Treasury ended up providing us grants every single year that I can directly invest in companies. So it's really incredible. And frankly, upstate New York was not using CDFI program for debt or equity. So the good news is now we've brought this financing vehicle and a lot of those federal dollars back home, if you will. But it kind of blew me away that upstate New York really is still struggling this much. So we got to work really hard at that. So CDFI is a really key world for me. It's a whole different lingo, whole 9 yards. ECO, that is our NYSERDA-backed clean tech incubator. And that has actually shown me a lot of my path forward. While a lot of these states like Pennsylvania and Ohio gave me the model, we called it the paint by number kit. That was our original business plan. I will say NYSERDA's work building entrepreneurial programs and affiliates throughout the state and sort of a family way of operating. I am actually modeling a lot of what I'm doing after that because I think it's been very impactful. And then the last piece is a piece that I think probably is one of the most important to me now, which is how we're serving underrepresented founders. And so we launched that through JP Morgan Chase support. As you see on the stats on the bottom of the page on the left, 43% of our companies are already, without us frankly trying, were minority and or women led. And then we have some amount of veteran representation there too. So we realized that for whatever reason, LaunchNY as an independent entity was attracting a lot of these underrepresented founders who maybe didn't feel they could go elsewhere. So we have really taken off on a program that I call Founders Go Big. And a lot of it is actually training people to feel more comfortable with the idea that they're going to not just start a corner store, not just go get that bank loan, which is a lot of what's being promoted in low-income census tracts and underserved markets. But in fact, they can think as big as anyone else. And we're spending a lot of time on that program now. And a lot of our fundraising is around that focus. So not surprisingly, here's our sweet spot, seed right in the middle, but certainly we'll take pre-seed to Series A. We are starting to see companies coming to us a little bit later now, just because of the network of funders. It's been pretty neat. One of the groups that's been investing with us quite a bit lately is Tech Coast Angels. So they've been contacting us and asking us for our due diligence, and we're seeing them come in. So a lot of times companies may be in that just at Series A, and they want to take advantage of some of that network that we have. I've shown you that, mentorship really is the top of that funnel. And, Zach, it might have sounded strange to you if we said something on the intake call, like, we need to mentor you, or you need to work with our mentors for at least 3 months before you can apply for our funding. But we do that because, first of all, frankly, usually companies need that amount of time to get everything ready to come on in. If a company is really ready to go and yet we still feel that they need LaunchNY, that they're not just coming in for our money, we can accelerate that. But you hear that we have, a whole cadre of mentors. I've got a partnership with the Southern Tier Startup Alliance that we've had, and their cadre of mentors for some time as well. So we will partner with other regions. True to Martin's, thoughts that we really need to work together. It's been really interesting that Launch has been approached by the eastern part of the state a lot to bring our seed funding, our mentorship models, whatever the case may be. Just haven't quite gotten there. And it's really interesting to me that everybody kind of wants to build their own thing. But at the end of the day, I think we all learn the same lesson, which is you need each other. So hopefully Martin and I will continue to see more hand-holding across the region. One thing that's unique with us too, versus us just mentoring and then handing off to another funder, we have an entire process to tap into our in-house funds. But that whole application and due diligence process that we do is really education as much as it is vetting. Because most of our clients have not raised capital, except maybe family and friends. And generally speaking, they really do not know how to interact with investors. They generally don't have a data room available. In fact, I have 2 entrepreneurs the other day who, we've got someone to lead our Series A. And I said, great, you're moving quick. So we're going to do follow on with you. So how about the data room link? Can you send me? Oh, we don't have that up yet. And I said, I wanted to say to them, was feeling a bit of a failure actually, that how are you guys already telling me you think you have a lead of a Series A, and you haven't shown them a data room. So at any rate, those are daily lessons. But that piece is a lot of what our co-funders have counted on, is that we're doing that due diligence. Then we're actually leading the entire deal. So for our first-time investments in companies, we're typically leading about 70% of those deals. We're forming the terms with the company, and we're doing all the deal documentation. And so that serves well for everybody, since, as you know, most investors will say, love to come in, tell me when you got a lead. So there we are, Launch is able to do that. Then portfolio management is the piece that is actually exploding for us now, because these companies we're stunned by the amount of funding going on, probably in the last 12 months, especially. So the portfolio management, we are working with Martin and Upstate Venture Connect to introduce what we're calling our Fast Forward program, which will actually have a variety of assessment pieces, curriculum, but also mentor panels that will serve as somewhat of a proxy board, because our companies are generally dealing with more and more complex questions about fundraising strategy, along with all the other aspects of growing their business. And they need more than just one entrepreneur in residence. So Zach, if you're to move forward with us, by the time you'd be coming in, we will already have some of these scenarios up and running, because this is meant particularly for our companies who have received our funding. Obviously, our goal is to get companies to, into that rapid growth and ultimately an exit. So let me, we don't need to talk about this unless anybody wants to ask about it. But as I just mentioned, the fact that we're doing the due diligence is a big part of why people look to LaunchNY for deal flow access or maybe co-investment. Okay, so as James said, the financing part is how I really needed to do things differently than any other venture development organization I had ever seen. The blue box is a nonprofit seed fund, and that's how most venture development organizations get going. And what that really means is the money's coming from grants and donations, and any returns stay with my organization. So our nonprofit seed fund, so that's the one that has 76 companies in it currently, everything returns to LaunchNY. Okay, no, if anybody's donating, they can get a write-off, but they're not going to get any of that money back. Most of the other venture development organizations have gotten their money from state sources or typically state sources, frankly, and they have been able to build that blue box. And frankly, they've had so much money that they didn't need to go build anything else but the blue box. So, for example, the Ben Franklin Fund out of Southeast Pennsylvania, the Philly group, great colleagues, phenomenal colleagues. They have 225 companies in their portfolio. Really, really big stuff, but it's basically all been out of the blue box. So when LaunchNY got going, we essentially realized that even from that crowdfunding campaign, that people liked what we were doing, but many wanted for-profit returns-based programs. So after I had the experience from 2016 to 2018 with the blue box, and everybody kept saying, love what you're doing, but really want returns. And then groups like banks really like that we're a CDFI, but they would say things like, well, we'd like to invest through our balance sheet, not through we don't want to donate through our foundation. So we set up 3 to date, maybe more in the future, but so far 3 for-profit programs. So the LP fund was, one that is modeled basically after a very traditional 10-year limited partner fund. But what it essentially means for our entrepreneurs is that they can come in through the same funnel you're coming in through, Zach, and then you get to look at all these programs, and we can fund you potentially from all of these programs. So I'll tell you briefly what they are, and then I'll just walk you through an example of how that really works day to day. So the LP fund closed it last year during the pandemic at $5.425 million over 70 LPs. So most of them are at the $50,000 level. The largest I have is at 500,000. And that LP fund, one of the things we all have to just think about, I kept trying to explain to people when I was about to close a fund, I was saying there won't be other funds for you to get into at as little as $50,000 for God knows how long. There are other funds open right now, like the Start Fast Venture Fund, for example, but the minimum is typically going to be 100 to 250. So, we were hitting a sweet spot for a lot of people who were kind of even wanting to do this for more impact investing, and for whom, frankly, $50,000 was not a big deal. When you ask for 250, people think a lot harder. The LP funds serve a great purpose, and the investors can be passive. They don't have to participate in the decision making. However, they don't come along all the time, and you have a long lifespan associated with that, which you do with any of these investments, I suppose. But I would just note that LP funds is typically the other way that venture capital has come into communities. It's just that for the most part, none of them wanted anything to do with seed investing, except in more rare cases. So for us, the LP fund has really been terrific because it's introducing all those 70 some odd people to these companies. Then we created this bottom row, which is essentially deal by deal investment opportunities, because many people said to me, I like to pick my own deals. So I don't really want to be in your pooled fund, your LP fund, where you do all the choosing. I want to choose. And even some of my LPs said, I might also want to put more money in to certain companies. So the investor network was an idea that came from seeing not just AngelList and Seed Invest and others, but really getting more acquainted with a model, ourcrowd.com, which was built on the affinity play of Jewish community of investors. So John Medved, as a VC, basically had a lot of people saying to him, I want to be in your deals. Well, unless you were in his fund, you couldn't be in his deal. So he finally just started a product that today has over 40,000 accredited investors in this online community, and has invested, I believe, over $3 billion in a couple hundred companies. So it struck me that upstate New York, people love upstate New York. If you came from Syracuse, you love Syracuse. You want to go home to Syracuse whenever you can. And many people are returning, or returning from San Francisco to Rochester. So we essentially created the investor network as an affinity play for those who want to invest exclusively through this vehicle in upstate New York deals on a case-by-case basis. So the investor network so far has invested, we topped $1 million. Our first deal got done in 2020. And we just closed our largest, which was over $400,000. And admittedly, it was a pretty attractive one to get into because it was a Series C, a follow-on in one of our portfolio companies. I have over 180 accredited investors who have signed up for this investor network. And my goal is to grow this. My near-term goal is 300 investors by the end of next year. But ultimately, this is a revenue generator for LaunchNY, as is the LP fund. So I get really excited about the idea that this is a solution that could be white labeled for other communities who suffer the same dynamics that we do when it comes to risk capital. So we're learning a lot from that right now, but that is a very active program. And so I'm constantly recruiting and I'm actually using a firm out of Syracuse called Good Monster, who is doing a LinkedIn outreach campaign and they also did our crowdfunding campaign. And I have to say that they have done things for us that no other marketing firm I found could actually do or wanted to do or knew how to do, including what they're doing for us now. So pretty cool to see that happening. I'll just mention in brief this second box on the bottom. Some of you may have heard of the Opportunity Zones program when that came up. That is all about low-income census tracts. And because that's where we focus, we decided we would offer that special financing vehicle for investing with capital gains dollars that an investor might earn. It can actually mitigate, in some cases, completely eliminate their tax burden on those capital gains if they invest them in business property in a low-income census tract. So this program is still operating. Sadly, New York State decided to not match the national benefits, the federal benefits. So we have closed on one of these deals, but we probably will not do many more because it was much easier to do in real estate, and company side was tougher. Nonetheless, I'm always looking at, there are other kinds of benefits like the 1202 that can be used for investing and as a tax incentive for investors. So we're always looking at ways that we might promote that more. So last slide here is really just to kind of show you how this is working day to day. So yesterday, as is typical, every Thursday from 3 to 4 p.m., one of our companies will come in and pitch for our dollars through webinar. And we've got, up to 9 members on the investment committee who volunteer their time. None of them are paid. Few of them are LPs. So that company pitched yesterday, and we did agree that we would invest in that company by the end of the session. So it's pretty neat because you can come in, and this process actually happens very quickly. And I would comment to you that when we commit the money, our money is in the bank. So the only thing that makes it slow after this point, if it ever is slow, is what's happening with the company. But for our part, once we tell you we're ready to invest, especially if we're leading the deal docs, we're essentially looking at right away wiring to you the $50,000 from the blue box, matched by $50,000 from our limited partner fund. And then if you are seeking additional dollars, which our companies usually are, so most often companies are seeking anywhere from $200 to $900 or $1 million when they come in on Thursdays. We can put that out to our investor network. As I just mentioned, Circuit Clinical, which is pictured, on the right there, they actually they've received 2 different rounds from our investor network for over $700,000 from LaunchNY. Plus, LaunchNY itself, from the top 2 boxes, has done not only the initial 100, we've now put in several $100,000 between those 2 funds because we've done 3 rounds of funding with Circuit Clinical. So that just kind of tells me, like, if as we grow this, we could be doing even more of those kinds of successive deals and, helping our whole community grow into Series C and beyond. Most of these, though, they're really a seed round. And our goal is to get these companies to their Series A. And that's where the new portfolio management program called Fast Forward will come into play. About 20% of our portfolio has moved through that phase. And there's more and more of it happening every day. Like I said, I almost feel like it's accelerating now. With the pandemic, it almost seems like people held back and now they're really wanting to invest their dollars. So that is what LaunchNY is all about.
Anybody have questions?
I do have a question for Marnie. I'm curious. First of all, this is amazing. I love what you're doing. Particularly, can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
So I was looking at the metrics that you had in regards to, I believe it was 43% minority or women-led businesses, and then 70-something% in low-income neighborhoods. And I'm just curious as to the types of business. Is there particularly, and James and I've had this conversation when it comes to venture capitalism, a lot of times the investors point to a particular industry, or there's certain industries that are safer for, exit strategy, for return on their investment. And I'm just curious, it leaves a gap, and it leaves a whole population of entrepreneurs that also face the same challenges, particularly as minority owners, that they can't access capital dollars. They can't go to traditional institutions. They may not have the history and all the hurdles that they're facing financially. And I'm just curious about the industries that you primarily focus on. What have you seen? Is it diversified, or are there particular industries that you kind of lean towards with LaunchNY?
Yeah, so really interesting. We are sector agnostic. that being said, we've seen naturally what we've seen is probably about 25% are tech-based. And that's not such a clean split, right? Because then I'm going to tell you about 20% are actually health, wellness, biomedical. Some of those may have an overlay of, almost everything's tech enabled these days. And then the next category really is consumer and business products. And we're seeing more and more consumer and business products. So for example, when you're talking about the fashion business, we're seeing quite a bit more of that. And I will say in our underrepresented founders programming, there's a lot in the fashion industry and the food industry, much more direct to consumer products. And so we don't shy away. We really are using that $10 million in top line revenue by years 5 to 7 as the metric. You don't have to be IP based. We feel like we are purposely here to help all of those who can make a difference in the job and wealth creation equation. So while clean tech is a big focus for us, and I'll give an extra plus if somebody's, we do have a bit of a scoring system. So if you come to me, even if you're an underrepresented founder in a low income census tract and you're in a strategically important area for investment in our economic development plans for the region, you're going to be given a lot of points to move ahead. One thing I will tell you that we ended up doing, because we have found some differences in our underrepresented founders, and doing Founders Go Big has been even more eye-opening for me. We're doing a lot of outreach. We've hired specific marketing firms that are bringing in exactly the audience we want. Maybe people who already have a Main Street business or an idea, but they would have gone probably to a small business development center and been put down the road of going and getting debt financing. We actually are seeing that people are intrigued by this path of high growth. And we've got some great video tools we've created to show what's the difference between a high growth business and a small business. But I do see a lack of confidence, somewhat of a lack of trust. One of the Black founders, who was our first one to receive special funding from the JP Morgan Chase pool, he literally wouldn't take PPP money. He had a garment business, high-end fashion garment business out of his home in one of our poorest neighborhoods. And we'd worked with him for 2 years. And we finally got to a place where he was comfortable coming in, taking our dollars, but we're working super closely with him just to get going with $25,000 so we can get him moved out of his home, the business out of the home, and get him better equipment and move him forward. But those are factors that I have a whole team of people that works specifically in this realm now. And I'd love to spend more time working on this, because I think at the end of the day, we've got to get more people enabled and motivated. And what I am seeing is with the, many of the scenarios like the unicorns we've mentioned today, I think we're seeing the usual suspects getting excited. We're seeing their family members saying, I will give you some cash for that. They're loosening the purse strings, but that's not happening for the broader landscape of our community yet. So, for me, it's been really eye-opening. And I estimate I'm spending about 5 to 10 times more resources on my underrepresented founders in order to kind of bring them through this process and encourage them. And in some respects, it's been really odd. I have a pool of money specifically for underrepresented founders, and I have not been able to invest it yet. And some of them, they're saying, I don't want to take money yet, whether it's trust or they're just not confident. They want more testing. So I do think it's just going to take a lot more and more time. And honestly, upstate New York doesn't necessarily really encourage going out on that limb for anybody of any color, size, or shape or color, right? And so I do think our culture in upstate needs to evolve as well. So this is going to be, I think, a longer term systemic kind of change I would hope we'll see.
Marnie, one of the things that comes to my mind is that with the number of companies you are now servicing, and you're very metric driven, and you're collecting a lot of data, I'm imagining that there's going to be a lot of opportunity to leverage that with more analytics in a way that could be of special interest even to your sponsors and others who are curious and want to help stoke growth in tier 3 and tier 4 markets, because that is what is unique for what you're doing, to be so geographically dispersed in tier 3, tier 4 markets. So I offer up, obviously, more good jobs, because we're trying to build a little bit of a research network. We had actually a pretty productive discussion this week with some of our researchers that were already involved in more good jobs research. We got a few folks from the Keenan Center right on this call, and we'll plant that bug there. But I just got to believe there's some analytics that with more resources specifically on that side could have some long-term benefit for everyone, and perhaps we can help.
Yeah, I'd love to get more engaged in that. And the other piece I did want to emphasize too. So, admittedly, I'm glad I'm talking to a number of folks here coming out of the Syracuse area. So for us, that is our, I don't know if I can say lowest volume area. So Promptus, I'm really thrilled that we've been able to do follow on. Right now, one thing that I hope would maybe attract more deal flow, we do have dollars that came from the feds for our CDFI status, and we actually have a time limitation. They're COVID relief dollars, and they do need to be spent particularly in low-income census tracts. And, while one of my major sponsors, the Wilson Foundation, came from the sale of the Buffalo Bills, does not support the work that we do in outside of Rochester and Buffalo, those are the only areas they support, the CDFI dollars do. And so I would just highly encourage, if you've got any companies that you think, fit our criteria, and you can hear where, even a founder who today has no revenue, isn't totally sure how they would get to quote big, that 10 million, we're here to help them do that. And that's what a lot of Founders Go Big is about. So I'm just going to encourage that if you know of anyone, Zach, as you just go on our website and you apply. But we absolutely are very interested in companies who are located often, in the incubator areas, generally are in low income census tracts. You don't necessarily have to be an underrepresented founder, but these are resources that we're eager to deploy. So, anytime you have an idea of someone who can come in. And one thing I'll also just let you know, so I have a great network of CDFI partners who do debt financing all the way down to microloans. And so for Buffalo, we've actually created capitalconnectny.org as a place that any entrepreneur can apply. And we take turns triaging to whomever of us is a fit. And I find that the economic development world tends to force us to be siloed into Main Street, small business, high growth. And I actually think that's a very false and sort of forced differentiation. I actually think entrepreneurs being exposed to the entire spectrum of what they can do is really what kind of jazzes me every day. So I'd love to see, more participation and engagement with Syracuse. Jeff Fuchsberg from the Tech Garden, I think, is going to be at this Upstate Capital Association Awards event next week. And I'm eager to meet him. I know there's been some changes there. Have a good relationship with Center State. We've partnered on a number of things, but I think it's easy for all of us to just keep kind of gardening and referring within our own plot, but would love to, whether it's on data projects or us providing support and access to capital, would love to have more connections.
Marnie, what if a company, as far as a company officially being in that type of location that would qualify them, is that a business address? Is anything more needed? Just a business address.
And one might argue, it's a little bit of a icing, right? It's not at the depth. On the other hand, what it allows us to do? It allows us to talk to our companies and say, we really want you to be aware you have even more resources available to you if you would locate your business in one of these areas. And again, many times there are some terrific incubator facilities. So I like the fact that we're able to, in some respects, support the economic development in those areas by by saying, I can give you more consideration if you are to locate there.
Interesting. We should follow up. There's probably a few companies that we could introduce you to. I don't know how ready some of them are, but that whole sort of top of your funnel of, the months of coaching type thing where they could be readied. And some are on their way to being readied, just through our own efforts. The second thing, there's three things. That was one. The second thing is kudos to the awareness. I think what I found at the university level with the younger entrepreneurs is that, one of our efforts has always been to just expose them to the options that they didn't even know existed, and making these distinctions of what high growth is and these different types of businesses, and that yields quite an outcome in terms, and you realize how much of a bottleneck that was in the first place. And then of course there's coaching where you get the deer in headlights of them thinking that this is too big for them, and then you sort of coach them through that process and demystify a lot of it. So kudos for you on that. And the third one, how networked are the teams within your portfolio to each other? Is there an effort to, because I like what you're doing in terms of betting on the entrepreneur. I'm a big believer in that. I think that's where Upstate is. I think Upstate needs to bet on the entrepreneurs and allow the community and allow those entrepreneurs to find each other, even if there are failures. The all-stars will find all-stars, and the second and third generation startups are simply going to be better. And that's what we saw. We went through a whole sort of micro ecosystem at Syracuse, and are starting to see it already at Lemoyne, where they find each other. And once you build the first platform and just support the entrepreneur without too much judgment on the business side first, but a lot of judgment on the entrepreneur, and then get them engaging with each other, they might walk through the cycle and then learn a ton, especially with coaching. And then the second and third tiers, the conversation just goes levels and levels higher in terms of sophistication and readiness. And the teams become that much more capable. I've seen this over and over and over again. Again, at Syracuse, and we're already seeing it at Lemoyne. Again, at a micro level, but it applies, I think, at a larger level. So I'm curious how much community building is going on amongst the entrepreneurs.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, because that has been the most highly requested service, if you will, or programmatic element among our CEOs. And so I will say, running a high volume operation, as I've described, sort of that base part, trains are running, it's great. What I have seen is when I have more resources to be able to create community. So we started doing CEO roundtables, probably the year prior to COVID. And we were doing those in person regionally. And it's really powerful, huge response to us doing that. And generally, we ran them different ways. We had some that were more formal program, some that were just, let's get together over lunch and what's your biggest challenge you're working on right now kind of conversation. But we have seen that with our programs like the Clean Tech Incubator and Founders Go Big, we've done much more to build community. And it's been really powerful. And so I don't want to sound like I'm whining, but when I'm able to get more resources to have the staff to make sure that those are well done programs and happening regularly, huge payoff. So that is a piece I still have to always think about, because at any given time I have, right now we have 331 active clients. And they're across all these sectors. So we've started kind of pulling out and saying, let's do roundtables. We did one, Hassan, for example, we did one in fashion. And I'm trying to remember the expert we brought in. I actually think we did it with our Founders Go Big group. They're happening episodically, periodically. They do need to happen all the time. We did create Slack channels once pandemic hit, because we knew people were fast and furious trying to get PPP information. But I do think what you've built, Martin, and UNY 50, that being pipelined all the way back to what we're all doing here and the companies as they grow, and then being able to become part of it and not having to wait until they fully exited. I think that if we can get there as a region, that will be incredible. And I don't know what we call that, but I do think that's when this becomes self-sustaining, because they all identify each other. And right now, I know one of the biggest complaints is most of the folks still feel pretty isolated, obviously, especially with the pandemic, but most of them do not know each other yet.
Yeah.
I think you shouldn't underestimate how isolated entrepreneurs still feel in upstate New York, right? Because of the mindset that you've talked about, the overwhelming, mindset that's here, the legacy mindset, let's say, whatever it is, that piece, I think, is so important in terms of leveraging everything that you're doing. Yeah, really.
Yeah, I sure appreciate the time. And I just want to say, I know, like in Buffalo, I'm excited what's happening with this M&T Tech Hub. The only thing is, when I go there, I feel like it leaves a lot of the other entrepreneurs out. So if you don't consider yourself a tech entrepreneur, you sort of feel like you're looking at that cool thing happening, this party happening with you not being invited. So I'm very attuned to the fact that we really need to figure out how to be much more inclusive. And I think that will naturally actually bring in more of the underserved neighborhoods as well. And the good news is a lot of the funding out there right now is supporting that kind of effort. So we're able to do more than we ever have been in the past. And, I do think working across region would be great. And just the opportunity to talk to all of you, because I didn't know all of you. I definitely have some notes here on some follow-up that I'm planning on doing with a number of you. So I just want to thank you so much for taking the time and listen to me talk about Launch New York.
Thanks, Marty.
Thank you very much. This was awesome.
Yeah, much appreciated. It is recorded, so others will have the opportunity through the Mortgage Jobs community to watch it too. And if you need to connect with anybody and don't have their email or whatever, just reach out to me. I'm happy to make the connection. So
excellent. Thank you so much. I hope everybody has great holidays, and we'll look forward to I'll see some of you in Rochester next week, but otherwise in the new year.
All right. Thanks so much, Marty.
take care.
Thank you.